My name is Stacy McCardle, and I'm 28 years old. For 12 years, I've carried a secret that nearly destroyed me. Today, I'm finally ready to tell you what happened when my family chose their reputation over my truth. It started on a Tuesday in October. I was unpacking boxes in my new apartment when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Uncle Richard is coming home for Thanksgiving. The family has decided it's time to heal and move forward. Heal, move forward. Those words made my hands shake as I set down the box of books I was holding. Uncle Richard, my father's younger brother, the man who had stolen my childhood and left me broken at 16. The man my family had quietly sent away to get help when I finally found the courage to speak up. The man they expected me to forgive and forget. I stared at that text for a long time, remembering the last family gathering I'd attended. It was Christmas Eve, 2 years after I'd told my parents what Richard had done to me during those weekend visits when I was younger. Everyone acted like nothing had happened, like I hadn't spent months in therapy learning to sleep through the night again, like I hadn't tried to end my life when the nightmares became too much. Stacy's just going through a difficult phase, I'd heard my aunt whisper to my grandmother. She needs to learn forgiveness. Forgiveness. Another word that tasted like poison in my mouth. I'd stopped going to family events after that. Stopped calling. Stopped pretending that everything was fine. My parents would reach out occasionally, always with the same message. When are you going to let this go? The family misses you. But never, we believe you. Never, we're sorry. Never, we should have protected you. I walked to my bathroom mirror and looked at myself. The scared 16-year-old girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had built herself back up from nothing. I had graduated college, earned my law degree, and spent the last 5 years working as a victim's advocate. I had learned to trust again, to love again, to believe in my own worth again. And now they wanted to welcome him back, like he was the prodigal son returning home. I picked up my phone and typed back, "I won't be there." The response came within minutes. It was my father this time. "Stacy, it's been 12 years. Richard has gotten help. He's a changed man. The family needs to heal together." Heal together. As if my trauma was something that belonged to all of them equally. I thought about calling my therapist, Dr. Martinez, but I already knew what she would say. She'd remind me that I had the power to choose my response. That I couldn't control what my family did, but I could control what I did. And suddenly I knew exactly what I was going to do. I opened my laptop and began researching. If my family wanted to welcome a predator back into their home, that was their choice. But they were going to do it with full knowledge of exactly who they were protecting. Over the next few hours, I compiled everything I had kept hidden for 12 years. The therapy records I'd fought to keep private, the police report that had been filed and quietly dropped when my parents refused to press charges, the medical records from the hospital visits they'd claimed were for anxiety. But most importantly, I found something I hadn't expected to find. I wasn't his only victim. A simple Google search of Richard's name brought up a news article from 3 years ago. A lawsuit filed against the construction company where he'd worked after leaving our town. A young apprentice, barely 18, had accused him of sexual harassment and assault. The case had been settled out of court, sealed with a non-disclosure agreement. I dug deeper. Social media posts from young women who had worked with him, carefully worded warnings shared in private groups, a pattern of behavior that had continued long after my family had declared him healed. My phone rang. It was my sister, Emma. "Stacy, please reconsider," she said without preamble. "Mom's been crying all day. She just wants the family together again." "And what about what I want?" I asked. There was a pause. "What do you want, Stacy? You've been holding on to this anger for 12 years. Don't you want to be free?" Free. Another word they'd twisted beyond recognition. "I am free," I said quietly. I freed myself when I decided to stop protecting people who never protected me. "He's family, Stacy. People make mistakes. Rape isn't a mistake, Emma. It's a choice." The silence stretched between us. Finally, she spoke again, her voice smaller now. "What are you going to do?" I looked at my computer screen, at the evidence I'd compiled, at the truth that had been buried for too long. "I'm going to make sure that everyone knows exactly who they're welcoming home." After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, thinking about the girl I used to be, the one who had believed that family meant safety, the one who had trusted that the adults in her life would protect her from monsters. That girl had died the day my family chose silence over justice. But the woman she had become was about to make sure that silence was finally broken. I opened a new document on my computer and began to type. Not just my story, but all of their stories. Every victim who had been silenced, every truth that had been buried, every family reputation that had been preserved at the cost of a child's innocence. By dawn, I had a plan. Not for revenge. Revenge was what broken people did when they had no other choice. This was justice. This was accountability. This was the reckoning that was 12 years overdue. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Detective Maria Santos, the officer who had originally taken my report. She'd retired from active duty, but now worked with a nonprofit that helped adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. "Stacy," she answered on the second ring. "It's been a long time." "Detective Santos," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. "I need your help, and I think you're going to want to hear what I have to say." As I began to tell her about Richard's impending return and the evidence I'd discovered, I felt something I hadn't felt in 12 years when it came to my family: power. Not the destructive kind that comes from hurt and rage, but the clean, purposeful kind that comes from truth and justice. My family thought they could rewrite history. They thought they could decide that enough time had passed, that enough silence had been bought, that their comfort was more important than my truth. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The investigation detective Santos arrived at my apartment that evening with a cup of coffee and a file folder that was thicker than I'd expected. "I never forgot your case, Stacy," she said as we sat across from each other at my kitchen table. "It was one of those that haunted me, a 16-year-old girl with physical evidence and a detailed account, and we couldn't move forward because your family wouldn't cooperate." She opened the file and spread out photographs, reports, and documents I'd never seen before. "What you might not know is that we kept investigating even after the case was officially closed. Richard McCardle left town, but he didn't disappear. We've been tracking him for years." My hands trembled as I looked at the evidence spread before me. "How many others? That we can prove? 4. That we suspect? At least 8 more." Her voice was grim. "The construction company lawsuit you found was just the tip of the iceberg. There were 2 other companies before that, both of which let him go quietly after complaints were filed. And before that, he was volunteering at a youth center." I closed my eyes, feeling sick. My family sent him away and told everyone he was getting help. They thought that was enough. "Getting help," Santos snorted. "We tracked him to 3 different cities. In each one, he found work that gave him access to young people. In each one, there were complaints. And in each one, he moved on before any real consequences could catch up with him." She pulled out a newer file. "But here's what your family doesn't know. 6 months ago, one of his victims came forward, a young man named Marcus Webb, who was 19 when Richard assaulted him at a job site in Phoenix. Marcus had been struggling with addiction and homelessness since then, but he got clean and decided he wanted justice." I looked at the photograph of Marcus, young, with kind eyes that held the same haunted look I'd seen in my own mirror for years. "We've been building a case," Santos continued, "but we needed more evidence, more witnesses. Your call tonight might be exactly what we needed." I told her about the Thanksgiving plan, about my family's decision to welcome Richard back as if nothing had happened. As I spoke, I saw her expression grow more serious. "Stacy, I need you to understand something. If we move forward with this, it's going to get very ugly very fast. Your family isn't going to thank you. The community that's watched Richard redeem himself isn't going to celebrate. There are going to be people who say you should have let sleeping dogs lie." I thought about that phrase, "let sleeping dogs lie," as if trauma was something that slept peacefully instead of clawing at you in the dark, as if predators were harmless creatures that should be left undisturbed. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Santos smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "Everything. Your original statement, your medical records, your therapy notes, if you're willing to share them. But most importantly, I need you to be prepared to face this head on. If we're going to stop him, we need to do it right. No half measures. No backing down when it gets hard. Over the next 3 weeks, I threw myself into the case with the same dedication I'd once reserved for healing. I contacted every therapist I'd worked with, requested every medical record, and wrote out a detailed timeline of everything I could remember, but the hardest part was reaching out to the other victims. Marcus was the first one I spoke to. Santos arranged a video call, and when his face appeared on my screen, I saw immediately that we shared more than just a perpetrator. We shared the specific kind of damage that comes from being failed by the people who were supposed to protect us. He worked with my dad, Marcus told me, his voice quiet but steady. They were friends. When I told my father what happened, he said I must have misunderstood, that Richard was a good man who was going through a hard time after some family trouble. Family trouble. That's how they described what happened to me. Family trouble. The thing that messed me up the most wasn't even the assault, Marcus continued. It was watching everyone choose to believe him over me. Watching them decide that preserving their image of him was more important than my truth. I knew exactly what he meant. The assault had damaged me, but the betrayal afterward had nearly destroyed me. Through Marcus, I connected with 2 of the other victims. A woman named Lisa, who had been harassed at a company where Richard worked as a supervisor, and a man named David, who had been a teenager when Richard volunteered at his youth center. Each conversation was like looking into a broken mirror. The same patterns, the same tactics, the same aftermath of isolation and disbelief. But each conversation also revealed something else. We had survived. We had built lives despite what had been done to us. And now we had the chance to make sure no one else had to go through what we had endured. Meanwhile, my family continued to send messages about Thanksgiving. My mother left voicemails about how much she missed me. My father sent texts about family forgiveness and moving forward. Emma called to tell me about the preparations they were making for Richard's homecoming celebration. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I focused on building an unbreakable case. Santos and I met with the district attorney in the county where Richard now lived. The DA, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, listened to our presentation with the intensity of someone who had prosecuted these cases before. The statute of limitations has run out on the original assault, she said when we finished, but the recent cases are still viable, and if we can establish a pattern going back to Stacy's assault, it strengthens everything. She looked directly at me. Stacy, I want to be completely honest with you. This case is going to put you under a microscope. Defense attorneys are going to try to discredit you. They're going to dig into your mental health history, your relationships, your entire life. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the 16-year-old girl who had been too scared and broken to fight back then. I thought about the years of therapy, the nights of nightmares, the relationships I'd struggled to build because trust felt like a foreign concept. But I also thought about Marcus, about Lisa, about David, and about all the victims whose names we didn't even know yet. I'm not that scared girl anymore, I said. I'm ready. Walsh nodded. Then let's bring him down. The plan was simple but comprehensive. We would file charges in multiple jurisdictions for the recent crimes. We would present Stacy's case as crucial pattern evidence, and we would do it all at once, before Richard or his supporters could mount a defense. But first, we needed to make sure Richard actually showed up for Thanksgiving. That's when I made the call I'd been dreading. "Mom?" I said when she answered, my voice carefully controlled. "It's Stacy. I've been thinking about what you said about healing and moving forward." The relief in her voice was immediate and painful. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so glad you called. I knew you'd come around. Family is everything. You know that." Family is everything. The phrase that had been used to silence me for 12 years. "I want to be there for Thanksgiving," I lied smoothly. I think you're right. It's time to let go of the past." "Stacy, I'm so proud of you. This is going to mean everything to Uncle Richard. He's been so worried that you'd never forgive him." Forgive him. As if forgiveness was something I owed to the man who had destroyed my childhood. "I'm looking forward to seeing him," I said, the words tasting like acid. Will he be staying at the house? Yes, in his old room. Just like when you were little. Just like when I was little. When he had easy access to me whenever he wanted. When my parents were downstairs watching television while I was upstairs learning that my body wasn't my own. That's wonderful, Mom. I'll see you Thursday. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and cried for the last time over what my family had chosen to do to me. Then I wiped my eyes, picked up my phone, and called Santos. It's confirmed, I told her. He'll be there. And so will I. Stacy, she said carefully, you don't have to be there when we arrest him. You've already done more than enough. No, I said firmly. I need to be there. I need to look him in the eye when his world falls apart the way mine did 12 years ago. I need my family to see that their choice to protect him has consequences. There was a long pause. All right, but we do this my way. You stay back, you let us handle the arrest, and you don't engage with him directly. This is about justice, not revenge. Justice. Finally, after 12 years, justice. The reckoning. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and cold. I stood outside my childhood home, watching my breath form clouds in the freezing air, and tried to prepare myself for what was about to happen. The house looked exactly the same as it had when I was 16. Same red brick facade, same wooden porch swing where my grandmother used to sit in the summers, same oak tree in the front yard where I'd once had a tire swing. Looking at it now, I wondered how a place that had held so many good memories could also harbor such dark secrets. Detective Santos was parked 3 blocks away with backup units positioned around the neighborhood. The arrest warrant had been signed at 6 a.m. By tonight, Richard McCardle would be in custody facing charges in 3 states. But first, I had to walk through that front door and pretend to be the grateful, forgiving niece they expected me to be. I knocked, instead of using my key. I hadn't lived here in over a decade, and I didn't want to presume I was still welcome to just walk in. My mother opened the door, and her face lit up with joy that made my stomach clench. Stacy, oh, sweetheart, I'm so glad you're here. She pulled me into a hug that I forced myself to return. Richard is going to be so happy to see you. Over her shoulder, I could see into the living room where my extended family had gathered. My father sat in his usual chair, reading the newspaper. Emma was on the couch with her husband Tom and their 2 young daughters, girls who were now the same age I had been when Richard first hurt me. The thought of those innocent little girls in the same house as their predator uncle made my resolve steel into something unbreakable. Where is he? I asked, keeping my voice light and curious. Upstairs, getting ready. He's been so nervous about seeing you again. He really wants to make things right. Make things right. As if there was something I had done wrong that needed to be fixed. I walked into the living room, accepting hugs and greetings from family members who acted like I'd simply been away on a long vacation instead of protecting myself from a toxic environment. My father stood up and embraced me, whispering, "I'm proud of you for coming home, sweetheart. This is what family is about." I nodded and smiled and played the part of the prodigal daughter returning to the fold. But inside, I was calculating. Santos had said they would move at 2 p.m. after everyone had gathered, but before dinner was served. That gave me 3 hours to document everything, to see with my own eyes how my family had chosen to handle this situation. Stacy? I turned at the sound of that voice, the voice that had haunted my nightmares for 12 years. Richard stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking older and grayer than I remembered, but with the same eyes that had looked at me with predatory calculation when I was a child. The room went quiet. Everyone was watching our reunion, waiting to see if their carefully orchestrated forgiveness would work. Richard approached slowly, his hands visible and open, a gesture I recognized from my training as a victim's advocate. It was something predators learned in therapy, how to appear non-threatening to their victims. "Stacy," he said softly, "I know this is difficult. I want you to know how sorry I am for everything that happened between us. I've gotten help. I've changed. I just hope that someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me." The performance was flawless, the perfect blend of humility and hope, the right amount of contrition without actually admitting to anything specific. He'd practiced this speech, probably with a therapist who believed his version of events. Everyone waited for my response, My mother had tears in her eyes. My father nodded encouragingly. Emma smiled hopefully. "Thank you for saying that, Uncle Richard," I said, my voice steady. "I appreciate your apology." He moved closer, and I had to fight every instinct not to step back. Could we hug? I know it might be asking too much, but it would mean everything to me. This was the test. This was what my family needed to see to complete their fantasy of healing and reconciliation. The victim embracing her abuser, proving that everything was forgiven and forgotten. I looked around the room at these people who claimed to love me, who had demanded that I sacrifice my truth for their comfort. And I made a choice. I stepped forward and let Richard hug me. His arms around me felt like being buried alive. The smell of his cologne was the same as it had been when I was 16. For a moment, I was that scared girl again, powerless and alone. But then I remembered who I was now. I remembered Marcus and Lisa and David. I remembered all the victims whose voices had been silenced by families who chose comfort over truth. I pulled back from the hug and looked directly into Richard's eyes. "I'm glad you're here," I said clearly. "There are some things we need to discuss." Something flickered in his expression, a brief moment of uncertainty before the mask slipped back into place. "Of course, I'm ready to talk about anything you need." The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. I sat through conversations about Richard's new job, his apartment, his journey of healing. I watched my nieces climb on his lap and beg him to tell them stories. I listened to my grandmother talk about how proud she was that the family had stayed together through difficult times. At 1:45, I excused myself to use the bathroom. Instead, I stepped outside and sent a text to Santos. "Everyone is here. He's in the living room with the children." Her response was immediate. 5 minutes out. When I came back inside, Richard was showing my niece's photos on his phone. Pictures from his job sites, he said. The sight of him with children made me feel physically ill, but I forced myself to sit down and wait. At exactly 2 p.m., there was a knock at the door. My father went to answer it, expecting perhaps a neighbor or a late-arriving family member. Instead, Detective Santos stood on the porch with 3 uniformed officers, all of them wearing serious expressions. "Good afternoon, Mr. McCardle. I'm Detective Santos with the police department. We have a warrant for the arrest of Richard McCardle." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel, the sound of a football game from the neighbor's house, the sharp intake of breath from my mother. "There must be some mistake," my father said, his voice confused and defensive. "What is this about?" "Richard McCardle," Santos called past my father. "You need to come with us. You're under arrest for sexual assault in the first degree, sexual abuse of a minor, and harassment in multiple jurisdictions." The transformation in the room was immediate and terrible. My mother began crying. Emma grabbed her daughters and pulled them behind her. My father stepped forward aggressively. "This is harassment," he said loudly. "My brother hasn't done anything wrong. He's been living a quiet life, working, contributing to society. This is obviously some kind of vendetta." "Dad." My voice cut through his rant like a blade. Everyone turned to look at me. "It's not a vendetta. It's justice." Richard stood slowly from the couch, and for the first time I saw real fear in his eyes. Not the calculated performance he'd been giving all morning, but genuine terror at being caught. "Stacy," he said, his voice no longer the carefully modulated tone of the repentant family member. "What did you do?" "I told the truth," I said simply. "All of it, and I found the others." The color drained from his face. "Others?" "Marcus Webb, Lisa Rodriguez, David Kim. Should I keep going?" Santos stepped into the living room with the other officers. "Richard McCardle, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent." As they read him his rights and cuffed him, chaos erupted around me. My mother was sobbing and asking what was happening. My father was shouting about lawyers and false accusations. Emma was demanding to know what I had done to destroy the family. But I only had eyes for Richard as they led him toward the door. Just before they reached it, he turned back to look at me. "You destroyed everything," he said, his mask finally completely gone. "This family will never forgive you." I stood up and walked close to him, close enough that only he could hear what I said next. "Good," I whispered. "A family that protects predators doesn't deserve to survive." After they took him away, I sat in the living room with my family and listened to them rage and weep and blame everyone except the man who had caused all of this. They blamed me for dredging up the past. They blamed the police for persecution. They blamed the other victims for lies and money grabs. Not once did anyone ask if I was okay. Not once did anyone apologize for the 12 years they had left me to carry this burden alone. Not once did anyone acknowledge that protecting Richard had meant sacrificing me. Finally, my father looked at me with more anger than I had ever seen in his eyes. How could you do this to us? To the family? To him? I stood up and gathered my coat. How could I do this? The question you should be asking is, how could you let him back into a house with children after what he did to me? How could you demand that I forgive someone who destroyed my childhood? How could you choose his comfort over my safety for 12 years? He's family, Stacy. Family means forgiveness. No, I said firmly. Family means protection. Family means believing your children when they tell you they've been hurt. Family means choosing the victim over the predator. You failed at being family the day you decided his reputation was more important than my truth. I walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. There are 4 other victims ready to testify against him. There may be more. Every day you spent protecting him was another day he was free to hurt someone else. That blood is on your hands. My mother looked up at me through her tears. Stacy, please. We can work through this as a family. We can heal. We had 12 years to heal, I said. You chose silence instead. Now you can live with the consequences. I left them there in their broken living room, crying over the loss of their carefully constructed lie. And for the first time in 12 years, I felt free. Not because I had gotten revenge. Revenge would have been small and petty and temporary. This was bigger than revenge. This was justice. This was accountability. This was the sound of silence finally being broken. As I drove away from that house for the last time, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Saw the news. Thank you for giving us all a voice. Then another from Lisa. He can't hurt anyone else now. We did it. And another from David. Justice looks good on you, sister. I pulled over and cried. Not tears of sadness or anger, but tears of relief. Relief that the secret was finally out. Relief that the burden was no longer mine alone to carry. Relief that somewhere, a potential future victim was safe because we had found the courage to speak. The aftermath. 6 months after Richard's arrest, I sat in a victim impact statement workshop, helping other survivors find their voices. The room was small and warm, filled with people who understood the particular kind of strength it takes to survive family betrayal. The hardest part, a young woman named Jessica was saying, isn't even what he did to me. It's that my family acts like I'm the one who destroyed everything by speaking up. Murmurs of recognition rippled through the group. This was the common thread that connected all of us. The secondary trauma of being blamed for the very act of seeking justice. Jessica, I said gently, can you tell me what you think your family is most afraid of? She considered the question. That people will judge them for not protecting me, that the neighbors will talk, that their reputation will be ruined. So their fear is about how they look to other people? Yes. And your speaking up forces them to face that fear. Right. So when they blame you for destroying the family, what they're really saying is that they're angry at you for not continuing to protect them from their own shame. Jessica's eyes widened with understanding. They want me to keep their secret so they don't have to face what they did wrong. Exactly. Your silence was never about protecting the family. It was about protecting them from accountability. This was the work I had thrown myself into after Richard's trial. He had been convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The other victims and I had watched him led away in shackles, and I had felt not triumph, but a quiet satisfaction that justice had finally been served. But the real work began afterward. The work of healing, not just from the original trauma, but from the betrayal of those who should have protected us. My family had not spoken to me since Thanksgiving. Emma had sent one email asking if I was happy now that I'd destroyed Richard's life. My parents had hired a lawyer to explore suing me for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress, though they quickly dropped that idea when their attorney explained that truth was an absolute defense. The silence from them was actually a gift. For the first time in my adult life, I was free from their demands for forgiveness, their expectations of silence, their insistence that family loyalty meant protecting predators. Instead, I had built a different kind of family. Marcus had moved to my city, and we had become close friends, bonded by shared experience and mutual respect. Lisa and I texted regularly, supporting each other through the ongoing legal proceedings. David had started a support group for male survivors in his hometown, and I had met someone. Dr. James Rivera was a trauma therapist who specialized in working with survivors of family abuse. We had met at a conference where I was speaking about the importance of believing children. He had approached me afterward, not with the usual professional curiosity, but with the recognition of someone who understood the landscape of recovery. "I was 16 when I told my parents about my uncle," he had said simply. They didn't believe me either. That conversation had led to coffee, then dinner, then long walks, where we talked about the ways trauma shapes us and the ways healing transforms us. 6 months later, he was sitting in my living room, reading case files while I prepared for my workshop. "How was group today?" he asked when I came home that evening. "Good. Hard. Jessica had a breakthrough about family loyalty versus family protection." He nodded, understanding immediately. "That's a big one. Did you talk about your own experience?" "A little. I told them about the difference between revenge and justice." James looked up from his files. "And what is that difference?" I settled next to him on the couch, thinking about the question that had driven so much of my healing process. Revenge is about making someone pay for what they did to you. It's personal. It's emotional. It's about evening the score. And justice? Justice is about preventing future harm. It's about accountability. It's about breaking the systems that allow abuse to continue. I paused, thinking about Richard sitting in his prison cell, unable to hurt another child. Revenge would have been finding a way to make Richard suffer the way he made me suffer. Justice was making sure he could never hurt anyone else. What about your family? Was cutting them out revenge or justice? This question had haunted me for months. In quiet moments, I sometimes wondered if I had been too harsh, too final in my decision to walk away from them entirely. Both, maybe, I admitted. It was justice because they were never going to change. Staying connected to them would have meant continuing to enable their denial and potentially putting other children at risk. But it was also revenge because I wanted them to feel the consequences of their choices. "And how do you feel about that?" "At peace," I said, and realized I meant it. For 12 years, I carried the burden of their shame and denial. I'm not going to do that anymore. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Stacy. My name is Amanda, and I saw your interview in the newspaper. I think my grandfather hurt me when I was little, but my family says I'm imagining things. Can you help me?" I showed the message to James, who squeezed my hand supportively. These messages came regularly now, survivors who had seen my story and found the courage to question their own experiences. "What are you going to tell her?" he asked. "The same thing I tell all of them, that she deserves to be believed, that her feelings are valid, that she has options." I typed back a response, offering to connect Amanda with resources in her area. This was what justice looked like in practice. Not just punishing perpetrators, but creating a world where victims felt safe to speak up. Not just winning court cases, but changing the conversations that happened in families and communities. A year after the trial, I received an unexpected email. It was from my grandmother, my father's mother, who was now 87 and living in a nursing home. "Dear Stacy," it read, "I have been thinking about you every day since Richard went away. I want you to know that I believe you. I always believed you. I was too much of a coward to say anything when it mattered, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. You are the bravest person in our family, and I am proud of you for finding the strength to speak up when the rest of us failed you. I hope someday you can forgive an old woman who was too scared to do the right thing. Love, Grandma Rose." I cried when I read that email. Not from sadness, but from the relief of finally being believed by someone in my family. I wrote back immediately, telling her that I didn't blame her for being afraid, that she had been a victim of the same system that had silenced me. We began corresponding regularly after that, She told me stories about Richard as a child, about warning signs that had been ignored, about her own fears and regrets. And I told her about my work, about the healing I had found, about the life I was building. "I wish I had been braver," she wrote in one email. "I wish I had been more like you." "You're being brave now," I wrote back. "It's never too late to choose truth over comfort." 2 years after Richard's conviction, Detective Santos called me with news. 3 more victims had come forward, inspired by the coverage of our case. All 3 were adults now, but they had been children when Richard abused them during various jobs and volunteer positions over the years. "We're looking at additional charges," Santos told me. "These new cases could add another decade to his sentence." I felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and sadness that came with these updates. Satisfaction that justice continued to be served. Sadness that there had been so many victims, that our family's silence had allowed him to hurt so many others. "The youngest victim was 8, Santos continued. "He's 19 now, just starting college. He said seeing your story gave him the courage to finally tell someone." 8 years old. The same age I had been when Richard first started playing games with me that made me feel confused and scared. The same age when I had tried to tell my mother that Uncle Richard made me uncomfortable, only to be told I was being silly and ungrateful. "What's his name?" I asked. "Tyler Morrison. He actually asked if he could speak with you, if you're comfortable with that." I met Tyler the following week at a coffee shop near his campus. He was tall and thin, with nervous energy and the kind of hypervigilance I recognized in myself and other survivors. We sat across from each other, 2 strangers connected by trauma and the man who had inflicted it. "I read everything about your case," he said, stirring his coffee with shaking hands. "The way you fought back, the way you didn't let them silence you. I kept thinking, if she can do it, maybe I can too." "Tell me what happened," I said gently. Tyler's story was heartbreakingly familiar. Richard had been working construction on his family's home renovation when Tyler was 8. The special games that were just between us, the gifts and attention that made Tyler feel chosen and special, the gradual escalation, the threats about what would happen if Tyler told anyone. "The worst part was afterward," Tyler said, echoing words I had heard from so many survivors. "When I finally told my parents years later, they said I must have misunderstood, that Richard was a good man who was just being friendly. They made me feel like I was crazy for thinking anything bad had happened." "How did you survive it?" I asked. "Barely. I tried to kill myself when I was 15, spent time in psychiatric hospitals, got addicted to pain pills. I've been clean for 2 years now, but it's been..." He trailed off, searching for words. "Hell," I finished for him. "Yeah, hell." We talked for 3 hours that day. I told him about my own journey through trauma and recovery, about the years of therapy, the relationships that had failed because I couldn't trust, the nights I had lain awake wondering if I was making everything up. But I also told him about the other side, about finding love with James, about the work that gave my pain purpose, about the family of choice I had built with other survivors. "Does it ever stop hurting?" he asked as we prepared to leave. I considered the question carefully. It changes. The sharp, constant pain becomes something else, a scar that aches sometimes, especially when it rains. But scars are proof that we survived something that was meant to destroy us. They're evidence of our strength, not our weakness. Tyler became another member of our informal family of survivors. He moved to our city to attend graduate school, and James and I helped him find a good therapist and connect with support groups. Watching him reclaim his life, seeing him grow stronger and more confident, reminded me why the fight had been worth it. On the 3rd anniversary of Richard's conviction, I received a letter that I hadn't expected. It was from my sister Emma, written on her personal stationery in the careful handwriting I remembered from childhood. "Stacy," it began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand why. I've been going to therapy for the past year, and my therapist has helped me understand some things I couldn't see before. I was wrong. We were all wrong. Not just about Richard, but about you. We asked you to carry the burden of our family's reputation instead of protecting you the way we should have. We prioritized our comfort over your safety. We chose a lie over the truth because the truth was too hard to face. I have 2 daughters now, and every day I look at them and think about you at their age. I think about how small and scared you must have been, and how alone you must have felt when we didn't believe you. The thought of someone hurting my girls the way Richard hurt you makes me physically ill. And then I remember that we let him back into our house, around children, and I am so ashamed I can barely function. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to respond to this letter. But I needed you to know that I finally understand what you were trying to tell us all those years ago. You weren't trying to destroy our family. You were trying to save it. And we were too cowardly to let you. I've been following your work in the news. I've read about the survivors you've helped and the changes you've made. I am so proud of who you've become and so sorry for who we were when you needed us most. Your nieces ask about their Aunt Stacy sometimes. I tell them you're a hero who helps people who have been hurt. Someday, when they're older, I'll tell them the whole truth about why you're not in our lives anymore. And I'll make sure they understand that you are the bravest person our family has ever produced. I love you, Stacy. I always have, even when I was too broken to show it properly. Emma. I read that letter 3 times before I could see through my tears. Then I called James into the room and read it to him. How do you feel? He asked when I finished. Surprised? Grateful? Sad? I folded the letter carefully. She gets it now, but it took 3 years and a lot of therapy for her to understand what should have been obvious from the beginning. Are you going to respond? I thought about that question for days. Part of me wanted to forgive Emma, to rebuild some kind of relationship with at least one member of my family. But another part of me remembered the years of silence, the way she had protected Richard while leaving me to suffer alone. Finally, I wrote back. Emma, thank you for your letter. It means more than you know to finally be believed by someone in our family. I'm glad you're in therapy and that you're processing what happened. I'm especially glad that you're thinking about protecting your daughters. They deserve to grow up in a world where they'll be believed if someone hurts them. I'm not ready for a relationship right now. The trust that was broken wasn't just about Richard. It was about all of you choosing silence over truth for so many years. That kind of betrayal takes time to heal from, if it ever does completely. But I want you to know that I don't hate you. I don't hate any of you. I'm just protecting myself the way I wish you had protected me. Keep being brave. Keep going to therapy. Keep protecting your daughters. And maybe someday, when enough healing has happened for both of us, we can try again. Stacy, I never heard back from her, but I didn't expect to. The letter had been about acknowledgement, not reconciliation. And that was enough. 5 years after Richard's conviction, I was invited to speak at a national conference on child protection. The auditorium was filled with social workers, therapists, law enforcement officers, and advocates, people who had dedicated their lives to protecting children and supporting survivors. I stood at the podium and looked out at the sea of faces, thinking about the 16-year-old girl who had been too scared and broken to speak up for herself. That girl never could have imagined standing here, using her voice to help others find theirs. My name is Stacy McCardle, I began, and I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. For 12 years, I carried that secret alone because the people who were supposed to protect me chose silence instead. Today, I want to talk about the difference between family loyalty and family protection, and why understanding that difference can save lives. I told them about Richard, about my family's response, about the years of isolation and healing, but mostly I talked about the survivors I had worked with since then. People like Marcus and Lisa and David and Tyler and Jessica and Amanda and dozens of others who had found the courage to break their silence. The most common thing I hear from survivors, I said, is I don't want to destroy my family, as if speaking up about abuse is more destructive than the abuse itself, as if protecting a predator is somehow more important than protecting future victims. I paused, looking out at the faces that were hanging on every word. But here's what I've learned. Families that protect predators are already destroyed. They're destroyed by secrets and lies and the pretense that reputation is more important than safety. Speaking up doesn't destroy families. It reveals which families were worth preserving in the first place. The applause that followed was thunderous. Afterward, dozens of people approached me, some sharing their own stories, others thanking me for giving them language to explain experiences they had never been able to articulate. A young social worker named Maria pulled me aside. "I've been working with a family where the teenage daughter disclosed abuse by her stepfather," she said. "The mother is pressuring her to recant because she doesn't want to lose her husband. What do you tell families like that?" "I tell them that a marriage built on silencing a child's truth isn't worth saving," I said. "And I tell them that choosing the perpetrator over the victim doesn't preserve the family. It teaches everyone in that family that some people's pain doesn't matter." That night, in my hotel room, I video called James to tell him about the conference. He was proud but not surprised. He had watched me grow into this role over the years, had seen me transform pain into purpose. "I have some news," he said, his eyes twinkling with barely contained excitement. "What kind of news?" "The kind where I get down on one knee and ask you to marry me." My heart stopped. We had talked about marriage in abstract terms, but I had never imagined it happening like this, over a grainy video call while I was 3 states away. "James, I know it's not romantic," he said quickly. "I had a whole plan with dinner and flowers and a ring, but listening to you talk about your speech tonight, about the family you've built with other survivors, about the work you're doing, I realized I don't want to wait another day to ask you to be my family officially." I was crying now, ugly, happy tears that I didn't try to hide. "Are you seriously proposing to me over FaceTime? Only if you're going to say yes." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Yes, yes, yes." We were married 6 months later in a small ceremony attended by the family we had chosen: Marcus and Lisa and David and Tyler, my grandmother Rose, who was 90 now but insisted on being there, Detective Santos, Dr. Martinez, and dozens of other survivors and advocates who had become part of our community. I walked down the aisle to "Here Comes the Sun" by the Beatles, a song that had gotten me through some of the darkest days of my recovery. As I looked at James waiting for me at the altar, surrounded by people who had chosen to stand with survivors rather than protect predators, I felt something I had never expected to feel: complete. Not because I had found romantic love, though that was wonderful. Not because I had gotten married, though I was grateful for that blessing, but because I had finally found my tribe. People who understood that truth was more important than comfort, that justice was more important than reputation, that protecting the vulnerable was the highest calling of any family or community. In my wedding vows, I promised James love and partnership and support through whatever came next. But I also made a promise to myself and to every survivor who might be listening. I would never stop using my voice to break the silence that protects predators and abandons victims. The reception was held in the same community center where I ran my survivor support groups. As we danced to our first song, "At Last" by Etta James, I looked around at the faces of people who had become my family, not through blood or obligation, but through choice and shared commitment to healing. This was what victory looked like. Not revenge against those who had wronged me, but the building of something better in place of what had been broken. Not the destruction of family, but the creation of a new kind of family based on truth and protection rather than secrets and silence. Richard was still in prison. He would be for many years to come. My parents and most of my extended family still refused to speak to me. Emma and I exchanged Christmas cards now, nothing more. But I had something they would never understand: peace. The peace that comes from knowing you chose truth over comfort, justice over reputation, protection over silence. As James and I cut our wedding cake, Tyler approached us with a shy smile. He was completing his master's degree in social work now, planning to specialize in working with child victims. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for showing me that surviving isn't enough, that we can take what happened to us and use it to help others." "You did that yourself," I told him. "I just showed you it was possible." "No," he said firmly. "You showed me what courage looks like. You showed me that speaking up isn't about destroying families, it's about building better ones." Later that night, as James and I sat on our hotel balcony looking out at the city lights, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. From the scared 16-year-old who had been silenced by her own family to the woman who now made her living helping others find their voices. Any regrets? James asked, reading my contemplative mood. I considered the question seriously. Did I regret the years of pain and healing? The loss of my birth family? The difficulty of building trust and love from the ashes of betrayal? No, I said finally. Not about the big choices. I regret that Richard hurt so many people. I regret that my family chose silence. I regret that it took me so long to understand that their failures weren't my fault. But I don't regret speaking up. I don't regret fighting back. I don't regret choosing truth over their comfort. What do you think 16-year-old Stacy would say if she could see you now? I smiled, thinking about that broken girl who had believed she was alone in the world. I think she'd be amazed that someone like her could end up here, happy, loved, using her voice to help others instead of hiding in shame. She was braver than she knew, James said, taking my hand. She was braver than anyone gave her credit for, including herself. As we sat there in comfortable silence, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi, Stacy. I saw your wedding announcement in the paper. My name is Katie, and I'm 17. My family is pressuring me to stay quiet about what my coach did to me. Can you help me find my voice? I showed the message to James, who squeezed my hand supportively. Do you ever get tired of it? He asked. The messages, the pain, the constant reminder of what you went through. Never, I said, typing back a response to Katie. This is why I survived. This is why all of us survived, not just to heal ourselves, but to make sure the next generation doesn't have to suffer in silence the way we did. I finished my message to Katie and hit send. You deserve to be believed. You deserve to be protected. You deserve justice. And you're not alone. Let's talk. Then I put my phone away and turned back to my new husband, to the life we were building together, to the family we had chosen and who had chosen us in return. The silence was finally, permanently broken, and in its place, we had built something beautiful. A community of survivors who refused to let anyone else suffer alone. A network of advocates who chose truth over comfort. A family that understood the difference between loyalty and protection. This was what justice looked like. Not punishment, though that had its place, but transformation. Not revenge, but redemption. Not the destruction of family, but the creation of something better. Richard had taken my childhood. My birth family had abandoned me when I needed them most. But from those ashes, I had built a life of purpose, love, and unshakable truth. And every time a survivor found the courage to speak up, every time a family chose to believe their child over their reputation, every time justice prevailed over silence, that scared 16-year-old girl inside me smiled and whispered, "We did it. We won." The war against silence would never be over. There would always be more Katies, more Tylers, more survivors who needed to know they weren't alone. But now there were also more advocates, more believers, more people willing to choose truth over comfort. The silence that had once protected predators was breaking, one voice at a time. And I would spend the rest of my life making sure it stayed broken.